In March 1986, Ronnie James Dio and Vivien Campbell parted ways, and later Vivien Campbell revealed that he was only getting $100 a week salary, and what Ronnie promised to the other members never happened. So let's find out if this is true and what really happened. In 1982, Ronnie James Dio, the drummer Vinny Appice, left Black Sabbath to start their own project. Ronnie invested his own money in the project. They formed a band called Dio in October 1982 in the United States with guitarist Jake E. Lee. After 6 weeks of rehearsals, Jake was dismissed. So how did Dio get Viv Campbell in the band? Bassist Jimmy Bain actually recommended Viv. Dio and Vinny went over to England to meet up with Jimmy Bain. They went to clubs, checked out bands and guitar players, but they couldn't find the right guitar player. When Jimmy came back, he recommended Vivien Campbell, and they flew him into London. The following May, the band released their first album, Holy Diver. It featured 2 hit singles, Rainbow in the Dark and Holy Diver. The album went platinum in the US in 1989 and double platinum in 2022. So, at the beginning, Ronnie James Dio made a gentleman's agreement with the other members of the band. He said that he couldn't pay them a lot, but if the project became successful until the 3rd album, he promised them an equal share in royalties, merchandising, and ticket sales. Vivien Campbell recalls that Ronnie sat with the 3 of them and said, "Here's the story. I had a record deal, and we are going to call the band Dio for obvious name recognition. We would all be writing the record together, but there is going to be no money in this. I can't afford to pay you a lot. You're literally going to get $100 a week. But if this project is successful by the 3rd album, we'll make it a completely equitable situation." But when the time came for the 3rd album, Ronnie forgot about the agreement. Wendy was his manager and estranged wife at the time. According to Vivien, Ronnie never talked to her about his arrangement with the musicians. So, Vivien expected Ronnie to keep his promise, and he worked very hard in the belief that the agreement would be fulfilled. But Ronnie just kept pushing it off. They got none of the record sales, they got none of the ticket sales, they got none of the t-shirts, just the salary. Vivien was the only one who tried to talk to Ronnie. He wasn't married, he had no kids, he didn't even have a home, he had no mortgage. He didn't know any better. He had nothing to lose. And it was always Vivien. Knock, knock. "Hey, Ronnie, you got a moment? We're doing album number 3. We need to talk." And Ronnie kept saying, "Okay, let's get through the album, and then we'll sit down with Wendy and we'll figure it out." So they got through the album and they started rehearsals for the tour. Vivien brought it up with Ronnie again. "Ronnie, we need to sit down and talk about this. We're on the 3rd album." Ronnie said, "Okay, well, let's get through the rehearsals. Once we're on the road, we'll sit down with Wendy." So they got through rehearsals, they went on tour, and Vivien goes, again, "Knock, knock. Ronnie, we really need to sit down and talk." But Ronnie kept pushing it off. Vivien was the thorn in Ronnie's butt. Then there was a break in the first leg of the American tour, and they were going to start in England, so Vivien went back to Ireland to meet with his family. As soon as he got to Ireland, he received a FedEx contract from Wendy Dio. Vivien recalls, "They offered me an extra few $100s a week, and they told me to sign it and return the contract. Failure to return it within 40 hours would stipulate it," meaning I was no longer in the band. "I tried to get Ronnie on the phone, and he wouldn't pick up the phone. That was it." So, they got rid of Vivien Campbell. According to Vivien, Wendy never saw Dio as one creative unit. Ronnie never explained that aspect to her. She always saw Ronnie Dio kind of like Ozzy Osbourne. It didn't matter who was behind him. He never told her, "I promised the guys. I have to share the money with them equally." However, Wendy claims that what Vivian said about Ronnie James Dio is not true, and Vivian was paid more than $100 a week. Here's what she says. I am so sick to death of hearing Vivian saying things like, Ronnie paid me $100 a week. Well, how did he buy a Ferrari with $100 a week? Ronnie was always fair to his people. It cost a lot of money to put that show on. All the time, we paid for everything. Buses, trucks, hotels, per diems, lighting, sound, and everything else. I think he treated the band very fairly. The problem is Vivian. For some reason, he decided he wanted to be Ronnie. Well, the band was called Dio. But the fact was that Ronnie had already been in Rainbow and paid his dues, and then in Black Sabbath and paid his dues. He wasn't just off the street and a nobody. I got really upset. I get really upset when I hear him saying all of the things about Ronnie. Ronnie isn't here to defend himself. I will. I have all of the paperwork to prove that, how much he did get paid. That just kind of upsets me when people say, oh, Ronnie was cheap. Well, Ronnie was never cheap at all. Well, when Wendy says we paid for everything, this is exactly the problem. She didn't pay anything. The whole band, which created the music and worked very hard, paid. In an interview with the Let There Be Talk podcast, Vivian explained how we got a Ferrari. The only reason I bought a Ferrari was 3 reasons. Number 1, it was a garden variety of Ferrari, the cheapest one. Number 2, the exchange rate when I bought it, I was getting paid in dollars, and the exchange rate was very, very favorable to buy sterling at that time. And number 3, I ate crew meals for years. I didn't spend a penny. Anything I earned, my per diems or whatever, went right into a bank account, and I said, I'm going to buy a car. Because at the time, I was still living with my parents in Ireland. So when I wasn't working with Dio, I'd fly home. I'd be like, hey mom, hey dad, I'm back. So I didn't have any overhead. I had no bills. So I kept everything. It was the same as years earlier when I was saving up to buy a Gibson Les Paul. I just focused on it. I wanted a 308 GTB Ferrari, so I saved up for a few years and got it. Well, in 1983, the price of a 308 GTB Ferrari was around $30,000, $35,000. If Vivian's salary was only $100 a week, he would make $5,200 a year. Certainly he couldn't buy a Ferrari with $100 a week. So Vivian was getting more than $100. One guy said that in 1983 he met Vivien Campbell, and Vivian told him he got $400 while Dio got $50,000 a gig. So if Vivian's salary was $400 by 1983, he made $20,800 a year. So now it is entirely possible that Vivian saved up his money for a couple of years and bought a Ferrari on his Dio salary. Apparently, Vivian received $100 at the very beginning days or the first year in the band. While $400 was nice, that surely wasn't enough because Vivian was as important as Ronnie for the band. It was the sound of the band. And for Wendy, Dio was the band, while Vivian was just a hired musician. According to Viv, she would go, no, you're the star. You don't need them. Get somebody else to play guitar. So they fired Vivien Campbell and got Craig Goldie in the band. People remember that when Vivian left, Dio's popularity was cut in half. On the Sacred Heart tour, the show with Vivien Campbell on guitar at the Philadelphia Spectrum was sold out. Then Dio came back to the Spectrum on the same tour, but with Craig Goldie on guitar. The Spectrum was not even half full. So Dio went downhill. It got smaller and smaller. However, Jimmy Bain said that Dio was already in decline by the time the band released their third studio album, Sacred Heart. Anyway, The two other members of the band are on Vivian's side. They confirm that Ronnie promised them an equal share, but he never fulfilled the agreement. Here's what drummer Vinny Appice says. We were promised to be sharing in things, and we gave it up for the first album and tour because, okay, it costs a lot of money to launch the thing, and Ronnie is putting in his money and whatever. But then it never happened. We were doing tours in arenas. Back then, one of the tours grossed $8 million. That was in those dollars. That's probably $80 million in today's money, about $25 million today. But we got nothing out of it. We only got salaries and stuff. So what was promised never happened. And Vivian, really, he called Ronnie on it and the management, so that kind of became bad blood with Ronnie. But we all felt the same way, that we're not getting what we were promised and we should be doing better than we're doing. Somebody's making a lot of money here, and it wasn't us. So that's what happened with Viv. And then Ronnie and Viv didn't see eye to eye. And then finally, Ronnie said to me, I'm going to fire Viv. I'm like, what? I was in shock. And I kind of mentioned to Ronnie that that's not a great idea because it's the sound of his band. And Ronnie decided that he can go on without Vivian. So that's what happened. Bassist Jimmy Bain, who played with Ronnie and Rainbow and on many Dio albums, said, Vivian did nothing that warranted his removal from Dio in what is still considered to be a cowardly way. For me, firing Viv was the biggest mistake of Ronnie's career. The problem could have easily been resolved if there had been a will to do so from Ronnie and Wendy. Dio should have gotten better with each album, but what happened was the opposite. The production was watered down with all the keyboards, and the songs were not as good because it became harder to satisfy Ronnie's need to complicate arrangement and structure. So, obviously, you have to invest a lot of money to promote the band. And as we know, Ronnie put in his own money, and he had a record deal when he was getting the band together. In 2003, Vivian called Ronnie an awful businessman and one of the vilest people in the industry. Wendy began her career by managing her husband, Ronnie Dio, who helped her with that. Obviously, she wasn't a very experienced manager either. By 1983, Vivian, Vinny, and Jimmy started to feel being ripped off when it came to royalties and ticket sales. They were playing big arenas, but they were getting only an average salary. And Holy Diver became gold in the U.S. in September 1984, and platinum only in 1989. The guys didn't know that musicians don't become millionaires until they got a few platinum albums under the belt. Def Leppard singer Joe Elliott says that they never saw a penny of profit during the early years. We had signed a record deal in '79, but that all that money went into running the band. Elliott says they earned around £30 per week, $39.40, which wasn't even enough to buy stage clothes. Once the band became successful, there was a lot of money going through the system. Elliott continues, we did not see a great deal of money until the autumn of 1983 when we got a check for the Pyromania album and tour. By then, even though we had sold 6 million records, we had a 7-year debt with the record label to clear. Of course, when we did get that check, it was the biggest I had ever seen. I cannot remember exactly how much it was, but it was more than 20,000 pounds, the equivalent of 65,000 pounds today. But because of our debts, we did not see any real money until 1988, when Hysteria shifted 12 million copies worldwide. Since they were finally making money, we were able to pay off our debts, Elliott says. And when you spread out over 7 years, it only worked out to a decent income. Probably less than your average doctor. It was 7 years of poverty and borrowing off our parents. Asked what the best year of his financial life was, Elliott said, possibly 1998, maybe 1992, when we released Adrenalize. But, as we know, Vivien Campbell joined Def Leppard after they released Adrenalize, and we can understand the hurt he still feels from not getting the royalties from Holy Diver. Last in Line, which went platinum 1987, and Sacred Heart, only gold in 1985. It was for a long time the last Dio album to receive this certification, until the very beast of Dio was certified gold on November 3rd, 2009. This is why he feels being ripped off and calls Ronnie an awful businessman. In Ronnie's mind, he paid his dues to get to that point, and he put up all the money and probably wasn't super rich at that point. This is what he said about Vivien while signing autographs for fans in 2007. I thought I gave you a chance and made you somebody. And now you're playing with who? Def Who? There's a rock band for you to have diarrhea with. So according to Dio, he helped Vivien in his career in the music business. But promise is promise, and it should be kept. Vivien deserves the same cut as Ronnie because he did some of the best metal guitar work to make that band big.